They say the real monsters don't hide under your bed. They sit in corner offices, dressed in tailored suits, sipping their expensive coffee while destroying lives with a flick of a signature. I should know. I worked for Titan Edge Global for 10 years. 10 years of pouring my heart into a job I believed in. My name is Rachel Monroe, and for a long time, I thought dedication was a kind of shield. That if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, delivered results, and played by the rules, I'd be safe. I was wrong. I started with Titan Edge when I was just 25, fresh out of business school with big dreams and a bigger drive. I climbed the ladder not because I played politics, but because I was good, efficient, creative, loyal. By year 3, I was leading projects. By year 5, I was managing entire departments. And by year 10, I was the company's senior financial strategist, overseeing some of our most critical clients. My work brought in millions. My name meant something. Or so I thought. Then he arrived. Brandon Keller, the new director. Slick, charismatic, the kind of man who knew how to fill a room before he even opened his mouth. The board loved him. Fresh blood, they called it. A visionary, a risk taker. But from the moment he shook my hand, I felt something off. The smile that lingered too long. The compliments that weren't about my performance, but about my posture, my perfume, my smile. At first, I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just the way powerful men operated. But deep down, I knew what was coming. He started small, dropping by my office with no reason, asking questions that had nothing to do with work, inviting me for drinks under the guise of team bonding. I always declined, politely, firmly. Then he'd laugh it off, acting as if I'd misunderstood. But there was always something in his eyes, a challenge, a threat cloaked in charm. The tension kept building. Meetings grew colder. Emails went unanswered. My recommendations, once praised, were now being reviewed. He began assigning my projects to others, junior staff, people I had mentored. And then one evening, everything changed. It was after a late meeting. Most of the team had gone home. I was gathering my files when he walked in and closed the door behind him. He said he wanted to talk, but the way he blocked the exit said otherwise. What he said next still makes my stomach turn. "Rachel," he said, his voice low, deliberate, "you've got a lot going for you. Smart, beautiful, valuable. But in this company, loyalty alone won't take you to the top. You know how this works. You scratch my back, I protect yours." I didn't even speak. I just stared at him, shocked, disgusted, and then I left. No words, no scene, just silence. But I knew right then. He wasn't going to forget that silence. And he didn't. It didn't take long. Less than a week, actually. Just 5 days after I walked out of that office without giving Brandon what he wanted, I got the call from Human Resources. I remember the way my phone buzzed on the desk. Like it knew what was coming. I picked it up, trying to keep my voice steady. And the woman on the other end, cold, mechanical, asked me to come in immediately. "It's regarding an urgent compliance issue," she said. My stomach dropped. Compliance? That was my department's domain. If there was an issue, I would have known. I arrived in the HR office still in disbelief, thinking this had to be some mistake. Maybe they confused a vendor invoice. Maybe someone had misfiled something. I had no idea what storm I was walking into. The moment I stepped into the room, I knew. Brandon was there, standing in the corner, arms folded, expression unreadable. The HR director gestured for me to sit down. She had a thick file in front of her, my name printed on the tab. She began to speak, words measured and rehearsed. "Rachel," she said, "we've received an anonymous tip regarding potential misappropriation of company funds, unauthorized expenses, irregular reimbursements, and possible fraudulent activity connected to your position." I froze. For a second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. Fraud? Me? I laughed, a dry, shocked sound that didn't even feel like mine. There must be a mistake, I said. This isn't possible. You know my record. My audits have never had a single discrepancy. She opened the file and started sliding papers toward me. Copies of supposed invoices, digital receipts, screenshots of transactions tied to my employee ID. It looked professional, it looked convincing, but I had never seen any of these documents before in my life. I turned to Brandon, who finally spoke, his voice full of false concern. Rachel, I'm disappointed. I always thought of you as one of our most trusted managers. But these are serious allegations. We have no choice but to take immediate action. That's when I knew. This was him, this was payback. The following hour was a blur. My access was revoked, my email shut down. I was asked to surrender my badge. Two security guards waited outside to escort me from the building. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear over the thudding in my ears. 10 years, 10 years of dedication, loyalty, excellence, gone in the blink of an eye. And not just gone, stained, twisted, dragged through the mud. I walked through the lobby with my box of belongings, feeling the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation. No one asked what happened. No one looked me in the eye. It was as if I'd already been convicted. Outside, I stood in the parking lot, gripping the box in both hands, trying to breathe. I didn't cry, not yet. I was too stunned for tears. But something inside me cracked open that day. Not just from the betrayal, but from the knowledge that someone like him could do this and get away with it. I had no idea how, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. The next few weeks were a haze. I stayed indoors, barely answering the phone, not even checking my emails. Every time I glanced at the framed awards and certificates I had hung on my wall, proof of everything I had built over the past 10 years, it felt like they were mocking me. Strangers might have seen me as unemployed, but in truth, I had been erased, branded, labeled something I wasn't. But shame never sat well with me. I had always believed in truth, in facts, in evidence. I didn't have the power Brandon had, but I knew how to investigate. I knew how to read documents, trace numbers, dig deeper. So instead of falling apart, I started quietly pulling myself back together, one thread at a time. I hired a forensic accountant, an old friend of mine who used to work internal audit at a Fortune 500. I trusted her more than anyone else. And when I told her what had happened, she didn't flinch. She said, "Let's find the cracks." No one forges documents perfectly. We started combing through every piece of so-called evidence that had been used to fire me. The suspicious invoices? Some didn't match the vendor formats we used. The reimbursement claims? They had approval stamps that weren't mine. And even worse, some had timestamps for weekends and holidays when I was provably out of town. One was dated during my cousin's wedding weekend in Vermont, and I had not only flight records, but dozens of pictures with family as alibis. Bit by bit, the truth started to surface. My ID had been used, yes, but not from my devices. The digital fingerprints didn't match mine. The access log showed logins from an IP address located in the executive lounge, a place only directors and senior officers had unrestricted access to. I was furious, not just because I was framed, but because of how easy it had been for him. Brandon didn't just target me. He exploited the trust and power he was given. He assumed I'd go quietly. He thought the weight of the accusation would bury me in fear, keep me from fighting back. He had no idea who he was dealing with. As I gathered more proof, I started reaching out to former coworkers, carefully, discreetly. Some didn't reply. Others gave vague responses. But two brave women came forward. One had left the company a year before. The other had been transferred to another division shortly after rejecting Brandon's advances. Their stories were eerily similar to mine. The same pattern, the same manipulation. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic. And that realization made my mission even clearer. I wasn't going to clear my name just for me. I was going to make sure he never did this to another woman again. My next step was riskier, but necessary. I contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a specialist in workplace harassment and defamation cases. And together, we began to build a case strong enough to tear down Brandon Keller's empire, brick by filthy brick. My lawyer's name was Melanie Cruz, a tough, relentless woman with a calm fire behind her eyes. She didn't speak in circles or waste time with pleasantries. After I laid everything out on her desk, the documents, the inconsistencies, the access logs, the witness statements, she leaned back in her chair and said, "We have something, but if you want to take this to court, you need to be ready. This won't be easy. People like him don't fall without a fight." I was ready, more ready than I'd ever been for anything in my life. Melanie got to work fast. She requested my personnel files through legal channels, filed an official complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and started the paperwork for a defamation and wrongful termination suit. We knew the company would circle the wagons, protect their golden boy, bury the scandal, keep the shareholders calm. That's when I decided to make another move. Quietly, carefully, I reached out to a journalist. Her name was Tasha Briggs, an investigative reporter known for exposing corporate corruption and abuse. I didn't want headlines yet. I just wanted the truth in trusted hands. I sent her a redacted summary of what I had, leaving out names but making the situation clear. She called me the next day. "Rachel," she said, "if this is real, and it looks very real, you need to know you're not alone. I've heard whispers about this guy before, but no one ever had the guts or the proof." It wasn't long before whispers turned into questions. Internally, the company began to feel the heat. My lawyer sent them a letter of intent to sue, and Melanie made sure it was ironclad, outlining every manipulated document, every retaliatory act, and every inconsistency they'd failed to investigate. They didn't respond immediately, but I knew they were reading and panicking. Then, like clockwork, they reached out. A settlement offer, 6 figures, confidentiality clause, no admission of guilt, a neat, quiet ending. But I didn't want quiet. I wanted them to say my name, not in private emails or HR reports, but in the same company newsletter that had branded me a criminal. I wanted my name restored. I wanted Brandon's name stripped of its power. And I wanted every woman in that building to know she didn't have to be afraid anymore. I declined the settlement. Melanie supported me all the way. And just days later, everything changed. Tasha published the article. The headline hit like a shockwave. Top executive accused of harassment and cover-up in high-profile firing scandal. The article was thorough, verified, brutal. It included snippets of interviews, blurred names, disguised voices. But the narrative was unmistakable. A rising executive misusing his power. A loyal employee framed and discarded. Other women stepping forward. Within hours, it was all over social media. Within days, board members were scrambling. Investors were demanding answers. Employees were sharing the article in group chats. I wasn't the disgraced former employee anymore. I was the woman who dared to speak. And this time, they were listening. The fallout was swift. The same board that had once applauded Brandon's leadership now held an emergency meeting behind closed doors. Statements were drafted, legal teams scrambled, PR firms were hired overnight to contain the narrative. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The truth was out, and the world wasn't willing to look the other way this time. Brandon Keller was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But we all knew what that meant. The company couldn't afford to keep him. Not with the kind of attention the article had attracted, not with more women quietly stepping forward, telling their own stories. One by one, they emerged. Former employees, interns, contractors, all with tales that echoed mine. A charming smile turned manipulative, professional interest turned personal, promises, threats, silence. The board tried to minimize the scandal, but I refused to disappear into the background. Melanie and I pushed forward with the lawsuit. Every delay tactic they tried, we met with more evidence. Every attempt to discredit me only added fuel to the fire. And when Brandon's legal team tried to claim I had fabricated the evidence, that's when we dropped the bomb. The security logs, the forged approvals traced to his login, the phone recordings from other victims who had nothing left to lose. They couldn't spin their way out of it anymore. Eventually, they folded. The company settled, but not quietly. One of the conditions I demanded was a public statement, not just to clear my name, but to acknowledge the systemic failure that let him thrive. And I got it. They released a formal apology, retracted the original accusations, and admitted that an internal failure allowed unethical behavior to go unchecked, resulting in harm to valued employees. My name was no longer tied to corruption. It was tied to courage. I walked away from the courtroom with more than a legal victory. I walked away with my dignity, my voice, and my power. But I wasn't done. With the settlement money, I started my own consulting firm, a workplace ethics and compliance agency built to protect employees from the very abuse I endured. And you know what the irony is? 3 of Titan Edge's biggest clients came to me within 6 months, quietly, respectfully, eager to work with someone who had proven integrity. I see Brandon's name in the news sometimes now, always attached to phrases like former executive or disgraced leader. He faded from power faster than he rose into it. As for me, I didn't just get revenge, I built something stronger in its place. And to every woman out there who's ever been told to stay quiet, to keep her head down, to endure, hear this. Your voice is powerful. Your truth matters. And no one gets to define your worth but you. Not a director, not a corporation, not a lie. Because the truth doesn't whisper, it roars.